Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Arenas podcast, the analysis of and responses to extremist narratives, where we explore the depths of extremist narratives across Europe. I'm your host, Firdaus Alawi, and today we are questioning Hungary and Poland.
Hungary is a landlocked country in Central Europe with a population of 10 million citizens. The medieval Kingdom of Hungary was a European power reaching its height in the 14th and 15th century. Later, in the 19th century, the Austro-Hungarian Empire spanned over a great territory of current Central and Eastern Europe, but as it collapsed in World War I, the Treaty of Trianon established Hungary's current borders, resulting in the loss of over 70% of its historical territory and more than half of its population, including a third of its ethnic Hungarians. This territory-losing trauma play an important role in the current narrative. After joining the Axis in the Second World War, the Hungarian People's Republic was established as a satellite state of the Soviet Union. The Hungarian Revolution of 1956 against the USSR's domination of Hungary through the local Stalinist government was crushed by Soviet tanks and troops, and thousands of Hungarians were killed. In 1988, the Alliance of Young Democrats was formed with the abbreviation Fidesz. It formed as a center-left and liberal activist movement opposing the ruling Marxist-Leninist government. The next year, in 1989, Hungary peacefully transitioned into a democratic parliamentary republic, and in 1990, Fidesz registered as a political party and entered the National Assembly in the election the same year. By the end of the 90s, Fidesz adopted ideologies of liberal conservatism and nationalism and took part in a center-right government in 1998 with Viktor Orbán as prime minister. After corruption scandals in the beginning of the 21st century, Fidesz's popularity declined and it served in opposition until 2010, when it won a supermajority in the election and Orbán came back as prime minister, a position he has held ever since. In 2012, a new Hungarian constitution came into effect, criticized for the consolidation of power to Fidesz, and following the immigration crisis, Fidesz increased its right-wing populist and anti-immigration rhetoric. In the European election of 2024, Fidesz was the largest Hungarian party with 45% of the votes. North of Hungary, we find the fifth most populous European Union member state with 40 million citizens, the Republic of Poland. As for Hungary, the national history is characterized by the loss of territory. Ideas of a glorious past emphasize the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth covering a great area between the Baltic and Black Sea from the 16th to 18th century. After World War I, the reconstitution of Poland was confirmed through the Treaty of Versailles, and the country regained its independence as the Second Polish Republic. However, with the Nazi invasion during the Second World War, Poland lost the highest percentage of citizens of all countries in the war, as around 6 million people perished, more than 1/6 of the pre-war population. In 1945, Poland's borders were shifted westwards, reducing the Polish territory by 20%, and 2 million Polish inhabitants were expelled from the eastern borderlands. In 1952, the Polish People's Republic was proclaimed, and it aligned with the Warsaw Pact throughout the Cold War, named after Poland's capital. With the fall of the Eastern Bloc, the Third Polish Republic was established, and the Solidarity candidate Lech Walesa won the country's first direct presidential elections in 1990. A shock therapy program was initiated to implement market economy, and both Poland and Hungary joined NATO in the end of the 90s and the European Union in the beginning of the 21st century. During the same time, the Law and Justice Party was founded, and it won the parliamentary and presidential elections of 2005 in Poland. After a period in opposition, it regained the presidency in 2015, which it kept until the 2023 election. The Law and Justice Party is identified as right-wing populist and national conservative with a law and order agenda, and it has pursued close relations with the Catholic Church. In the European elections of 2024, Law and Justice was the largest Polish party and gained 25 of the country's 52 seats in the European Parliament.
We are joined today with Katalin Miklóssy from the University of Helsinki. Hello, Katalin. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation. Hello, everybody. It's an honor and privilege to be a part of this podcast.
Thank you so much. The honor is ours. So before we start with the episode in itself, this is what I'm going to do with all the other episodes. I want to talk about you first. I'll briefly introduce you, but I do want to ask you to talk a bit about your work for it to be more related to what we're doing. So you are head of Eastern European Studies in the University of Helsinki. And your work is focused on the impact of regional security, conceptions on nationalism and conservatism, especially around Eastern Central European countries. Is that right?
Yes, and I'm actually following the rule of law evolution in a frankly wide area of the Eastern EU, particularly.
Nice. And what about your latest publications, your latest project you would highlight, Katalin?
My latest project. Say, I'm at the moment a Jean Monnet professor dealing with the link between how security conceptions had an impact on the choices of the rule of law and how actually the so-called extremist trend are strengthening over a fairly long period of time in the Eastern sphere of the European Union.
Oh, wow. That is so interesting because it's very related to what we're going to talk about today. So let's get into it because I don't want to make the introduction much longer. So to start with, I wanted to discuss the concept of extremism, in fact, or extremist narratives and the importance of institutions in shaping those narratives. In fact, you just said European Union, extremism. So could you explain to us how extremist narratives are defined in the context of Hungary and Poland and why institutions play such a crucial role in their formation and dissemination?
Yes, that's a very good question. Actually, when we think about on the European arena what is extremism, it is generally thought that it is a kind of challenging narrative from the margins, from the margins that are actually threatening the mainstream narrative. This is per se thought about as the extreme. Now, the problem from the Eastern perspective is that many of the tropes, many of the topics, many of the way of speech has already been mainstreamed. So all of a sudden, the consolation is swapped in a sense that actually what is mainstream is can be categorized as extreme in the West, but on the other hand, what is extreme in the East is more and more about liberalism or left-wing ideas, because this is what is challenging the mainstream nationalist conservative way of speech.
Mm-hmm. I see. So we could say that more or less the opposite happens of what we have seen or what we will see in the podcast in other countries. You said that what's challenging is the leftist narrative rather than what we have the extreme right that we consider in Western Europe, right?
Yes, exactly. But if you look at the latest EU elections, you can see the mainstreaming trend also in the West. But it has happened already some years ago in the East. So this is what would we say that the East is a forerunner in this process or procedure that is taking place now more and more in France and Germany and even Spain and Italy. So this is a kind of a circulation of a trend of how extremism is becoming more and more accepted by a vast majority of people.
Yeah, absolutely, because like it's not an isolated trend, like you say. So to better understand how like these narratives that we're talking about are shaped, it's important to explore the key tools used in this process. For example, I can think of history, politics, historical institutionalism, and culture wars. These concepts provide a framework for understanding the strategies, especially in Hungary and Poland. Could you walk us through each of these concepts and how we see them in the case of, again, Hungary and Poland? So, like,
I would like to
yes.
go back to the first question,
Yes?
because I didn't
Awesome.
answer
Yes.
the first question about how institutions are playing a crucial role in this mainstreaming narrative. Let's imagine that actually politician cannot be innovative regarding a kind of narrative, or because if all individual politicians are coming up with different kind of ideas regarding, let's say, mainstream extremism, then there is a problem how these politicians can be connected to their ideological home, a party, for example. So a party has to be consistent regarding the message they are sending out. So when we are talking about extremist narrative, it has to be consistent. So it is not about flying solo by different politicians, but they have to be connected to the core message of the party. And the core message of the party are always, one way or the other, can be traced back to an institution. I don't know, for example, a political, institution that is creating a kind of, basic narrative, an ideological core unit, or a think tank that are generally the parties are using. So there are always, one way or the other, a kind of core institution that are producing a certain kind of narrative that the politicians are bringing forward on their own activities on the public arena. So that's why institutions matters, because in the end they are those that producing the idea of the narrative, the main concept of the narrative. So that's why institutions matters. But then we go to history. History is important because history is very much connected to the identity of a community. Now, the past provides a kind of continuity for any community. And if you have a glorious past for a community, it means that you can have a bright future, because it is, the interpretation of the past for a community, the right type of past, is important for the community, for of course, current political purposes, but also for the image that this community will survive for the future. So this is important for looking at history. Now, history politics means that actually we historians say that there is no such thing as history. We have only the past, and we elevate certain kind of events, certain kind of heroes from the flow of billions of events of the past, and you create through this selection a kind of narrative. Why it is important exactly these events, these heroes for you. And of course, the ultimate community is about the nation. So different political parties understand the nation concept differently. But for example, in when we are talking about extremists and national conservatives, they have a certain kind of interpretation. Now, these interpretations are not only created as a solid narrative, but these have to be ingrained into more solid structures as institutions. So historical institutions are serving here as a kind of instrument for maintaining a certain kind of narrative, and not only maintaining, but elevating it as the ideal interpretation, the most important narrative, and marginalizing all other narratives, and not only marginalizing but also ruling out. And this is exactly the concept of this institutional warfare that we can see in the East, but also in the West, which means a kind of culture war, which means that you need to take over certain kind of institutions in order to guarantee the continuity of a political system. And if I may continue, this is a kind of interesting what we can see, especially in the East, because this kind of institutional takeover is a very much a kind of Marxist idea from the 1920s of Antonio Gramsci, who was a political theorist. And who pointed out that actually, if you want to establish firmly a political system, it is not really about economy or the political power, but it is about culture. That if you take over the hegemony of culture and cultural institutions, obviously, then you can have a kind of uniform culture. I mean, a civilizational wide understanding, and also this provides you a very consistent value system and a collective will. And of course, culture is also a kind of transgenerational phenomenon, yes, which means that actually you invest into the future, because this, and that is why, of course, Gramsci was read by actually conservatives and right-wing people who understood that this is the key for a conservative revolution. If you take over institutions, then you can create an era, a new ideological era.
Absolutely. In fact, I have a couple of notes of what you said because I found them very interesting. But let's start with the last thing that you said. It's true what you mentioned, because as you were talking, I was thinking of different cases of, for example, fascism in the West. Even though we're talking now about the East, but I see the comparison that you're doing, or the similarities that you're finding there. That the takeover starts with institutions and then moves to education and moves to popular culture. It makes sense. So what we understand is that the institutions are the basis of everything. So if you don't have the institutions, you don't have anything else. But of course, for the longevity of the regime or the longevity of the narrative, you need to make people believe in what you're saying. So absolutely, yes. I totally agree with you. Of course, how could I disagree? It's absolutely right. And also you said that we need not only institutions, but that the narrative is consistent throughout the political party. And I want to ask you, what would happen if, for instance, we have just an individual that is trying to push a narrative? Would that just be eventually forgotten or not given as much attention? Or could it be successful in being a more popular narrative? I'm thinking of not in Europe now, but I'm thinking of Trumpism, for example. He's just one individual. He doesn't represent the whole political party, even though he's part of it. But yet people are voting Trump, not Republicans. So what would you say about that?
Yes, this is a very good question. Now, on one hand, the Trumpists has also have also relying on institutions very much so, but you are right, and particularly in our social media in a time or period, there are always influencers who can push forward a different kind of agenda. Now, the problem here is that we are living in bubbles also in the social media space. So the question is that these influencers can be heard within a certain, let's say, liberal bubbles, and we are all agree with it. But that's it. The bubbles have limitations to spread the information, and this is the problem actually today. That if you master institutions, this is a powerful thing because they have more, publicity, they have more power to push forward their own message. Whereas, we have different kind of bubbles, leftist bubbles and woke bubbles and whatever, liberal bubbles, and we all agree with each other, but we don't look through the boundaries of the bubbles. So this is the problem also nowadays with the social media. And back to Trumpism, as I said, they cover half of the institutions of the United States, and it is important. And not only important, but if they come to power, they will take over all the rest, or almost. They will try, obviously.
Yes.
But if they have, look at, for example, the schooling system for the conservative areas in the United States, they can say what kind of books are out, right?
Yes.
So they can make a very good, very, very strong argument that what is the valid history, for example, what is the valid value system. So,
yes, no, I totally get you. So it's more like we take Trump as our figure, but like it's a whole ideology behind. I want to ask you, does that happen in Europe as well? And specifically, let's go back to Hungary and Poland. Like, can we see like a similar example in these countries?
Yes, actually, and this is a kind of sad story because this mainstreaming of what we call in the West extremism, and what we call it just national conservative ideology in the East, that has started to get more and more leverage in the public space already since 2010. So it is, 14 years that has been, increasingly strengthening this kind of narrative. But the question is, of course, that in Hungary and later after 2015, Poland, the regime has changed, and the regime was a kind of concentrating power, not only on the grip of society and try to weaken the rule of law, but also taking over more and more about institutions, and particularly not only cultural institutions, but especially historical institutions. But it was important for the regime's identity to create a strong nationalist story about the greatness and the strength of the nation. If you have a strong leadership, it will create a kind of security for the national existence. So that is why it is very powerful, and that is why how it is very much interlinked with the understanding of security. So since the 2010s, the European Union more and more have been criticizing Hungary and later Poland, and they understood it as a kind of threat on the integrity of of the country, which is why this kind of narrative was very popular because it was interpreted as the threat against the West. This is why they went back to all those historical events and images where they were successful to defend the nation against threats from left and right, or right. I mean, from the outside. And this is why history is important. That gives you a kind of strong understanding of legitimacy and strong understanding that we can survive against all attacks from the outside.
Totally. Yes, absolutely. And it's, again, I'm using the same word, but everything you're saying is very interesting, and it's leading me to more questions. The only thing that we don't have so much time. But you did talk, well, first of all, I just want to make one comment, and it's on the selective history that extremist narratives, which we tend to see that they pick and choose more or less. So and that repeats itself not only in Eastern Europe, but Western Europe, and also in North America, and also in other regimes. So it's it's a thing that it's not specifically of one region. Now, that being said, you mentioned nation or nationalism, identities. I would like to talk about that. So I want to go more in depth in some specific examples of how Hungary and Poland have used institutions and narratives to shape their national identities and political landscapes. So both nations have core mottos in their cultural wars. So we have national integrity in Hungary and blameless nation in Poland. Could you elaborate on how these mottos are reflected in the key institutions? More or less, we have been talking about this, but let's go into it a bit more, specifically these two. So in institutions and in memory loss in each of the countries.
Yes, I would like to go back a bit to why it is important that it is not only about securing the nation concept against the outside forces, but also forces within. So this kind of institutional takeover is against, for example, the liberal intelligentsia, the liberal historians, or the left-wing historians, because they both are understood as they have had a full power, or as it has been argued, a majority power over this kind of cultural institutions or historical institutions, and they have no right because they are unnational forces. Now the left wing is seen as a kind of an offspring of communists, and the communist era that we all suffered for 40 years. It was their fault. And the liberals are blamed for the post-communist transition that was very, very painful. It was a kind of neoliberal drive where market economy was creating the societal transformation, and a lot of people suffered. So these are the main arguments against why you need to take over these kind of particularly historical institutions where you create the glorious story for the nation. Now for Hungary, it has been because the EU criticized Hungary longer time than Poland, almost 5 years longer, because the Orbanist regime has been established earlier. The most important thing is that to accentuate for the people that we are independent nation. So all the institutions are circulated around this main message that Hungary can be independent from the Western bullying, right? So this is for Hungary, and this is how all these the constitution that has been modified in 2011 that had a strong message that what is the national ultimate legal values that is embedded in the history, the bright history, or how you should remember the communist regimes or the Nazi regimes, that always somebody else's fault. And this is exactly how it resembles with Poland. Poland started to build up this authoritarian regime since 2015. Now it is a change, at least hopefully. But nevertheless, Poland was more attached to the understanding that Poland is the victim of the West and the East. And the victimhood was actually emphasized through the Holocaust memory, where Poland created a new memory law in 2018 that said that Poland was faultless for the Holocaust tragedy, and because Poland was a victim itself, which is not really true. We knew as historians, there were a lot of collaborators and so on. But nevertheless, when you have the memory law, it means that you can go to jail if you don't, if you cross with the mainstream interpretation of history. So this is a kind of very rigid understanding how you cannot challenge, a certain official history.
Yep. Yeah. And it goes back to what you and I also kind of commented on that, on what you were saying, again, selective history and the culturally, how are we embedding certain ideas that we want people to remember or not. So it's absolutely that. So, Katalin, I am so sorry, but we will have to finish the episode here. But because you were talking and I was writing down so many questions, I will continue saying this throughout the season. Every single episode can be 2 or 3 even, because of how much discussion it can lead to in very different topics, not only in what we're focusing. But I do want to thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you so much again for being here. We would love to have you again. So if we do a second season, you are more than welcome to come back and to talk more about this. And to our listeners, thank you so much for listening to this first episode. We would love to hear your opinion, and we would love to continue seeing you or hearing you in the next one. Thank you so much, and see you in the next one. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
This podcast is part of the Arenas project, funded by the European Union Horizon Programme, under the Framework Programme for Research and Innovation, 2021 to 2027. Speaker voice, Gabriel Wahl.